Take a moment and come with me. Gently bring your awareness inward, not to search, not to figure anything out, but to recognize what is already here. Feel your body where you are. Feel your breath as it moves. Without effort, notice this. You are not trying to arrive anywhere. You are already here. There is nothing you need to reach for in this moment. Nothing you need to become. Just this. Awareness, presence, being. And if your mind begins to move, let it. You don't need to follow it. Just remain here. Because what we are entering today is not something to seek. It is something to remember. Welcome back to the garden. As we continue, stay with that awareness you just noticed. And from that place, gently see this. There is nothing here you need to figure out, nothing to work toward, nothing to become, only something to recognize. A presence that is not ahead of you, but already here. A steadiness that does not come and go, even if your experience does. Notice how it remains, without effort, without holding it in place. And from here, understand this. We are not moving toward wholeness. We are noticing where it already exists. So, instead of reaching, just stay. Let what is true be felt. In our last episode, we spoke about integration, living what has been revealed, allowing truth to take form in how you live. But there is a natural unfolding beyond that. Not a new step, but a deepening. Because when truth is no longer something you visit and becomes something you live, something else begins to happen. You stop searching. We've been walking through a simple truth. Seek the truth and you will find it. And when you find it, you will be disturbed. And when you are disturbed, you will be amazed. And now the final movement. And you will reign over all things. And you will find rest. Not control, not dominance, but mastery, alignment, peace. To reign here is not about power over life. It's about no longer being ruled by it, no longer being ruled by fear, by reaction, by unconscious patterns. And rest is not doing nothing. It is no longer being divided within yourself. Wholeness is not perfection. It is not having everything figured out. It is not never feeling discomfort again. Wholeness is the end of inner conflict. It is what remains when nothing within you is being rejected. The mind may still think, but it no longer pulls you away. Emotions may still move, but they don't take you with them. Life still happens, but there is no longer resistance to it because something deeper has stabilized. Presence, peace, clarity. For me, it didn't come as a dramatic moment. It came quietly, almost unnoticeable at first. After all the cycles, awakening, healing, integration, I realized something subtle. I wasn't searching the same way anymore. I wasn't asking the same questions. I wasn't trying to fix myself. Even when things arose, I didn't feel the need to chase them down or resolve them immediately. There was space. And in that space, there was peace. Not because everything in my life was perfect, but because I wasn't at war with myself anymore. And that's when I began to understand wholeness isn't something you feel all the time. It's something you stop leaving. There's something I didn't understand at this particular time in my life, but I can see it clearly now. There was a season where on the outside, it didn't look like things were coming together. It looked like everything was uncertain. I had just received a large sum of money, and then, almost unexpectedly, everything shifted. We had to leave our home. The owners sold it, and the new owners wanted to renovate. And finding another place wasn't simple. There were requirements, restrictions, income expectations, proof that didn't quite match the way I lived or worked at the time. So instead of settling somewhere new, I spent that season moving. Airbnbs, different towns, different spaces, and over time, it added up to over $30,000. But what I didn't realize then was what I had stepped into because something else was happening, something quieter, something deeper. I was free. We took road trips almost every weekend, places I had never thought to visit: Mesquite, Laughlin, Virginia City, Needles. We made day trips to places like Nipton, Seven Magic Mountains, the oasis at the end of Zizek's Road. And there was no overthinking, no hesitation. If I felt led to go somewhere, I went. If I woke up and felt like sitting in silence at Red Rock, I went. If I wanted to drive out to Pahrump, or dance in the snow at Mount Charleston, I didn't question it. I just followed. And yes, I was still working, but even that felt different. I worked when I felt aligned to. I moved when I felt called to. There was no internal resistance, no constant negotiation within myself. And recently, I found myself longing for that time, not because of the places, not because of the movement, but because of how I felt. And it took me a while to understand why. But when I finally saw it, it became clear. What I was experiencing then was wholeness, not because everything in my life was stable, not because everything was figured out, but because I was not divided within myself. I wasn't being pulled between who I was and what I thought I needed to be. I wasn't anchored to expectations or material attachments or external definitions of stability. For a moment in time, I was simply living, responding, moving, being. And there was a kind of rest in that I didn't even recognize until it was gone. Not a rest from doing, but a rest from resistance. And that's when I began to understand wholeness isn't about having everything in place. It's about no longer being at war within yourself while life is unfolding. For a brief time, I experienced that fully. And now I can see it was never about the circumstances. It was about the alignment. At the end of the journey, there is no finish line, only a return to what has always been here, beneath the seeking, beneath the healing, beneath the becoming. You don't become whole, you recognize that you were never separate. There comes a moment when even the one who is searching begins to quiet. And to understand this fully, it helps to see the journey clearly. Because in the beginning, most of us are not aware that we are even listening. There's just a voice, thoughts, reactions, patterns, and we move with them without question. This is what can feel like the random voice, the mind speaking, conditioning repeating, old narratives continuing. And we follow it, believing it is us. But then awakening begins and something shifts. You don't just hear the voice anymore, you notice it. And in that moment, a new layer is born. The seeker, the one who begins to ask, is this true? Why do I feel this? Who am I beneath this? And this stage is powerful because it creates space. But it can also become subtle because the seeker often still carries effort, still carries movement, still carries the sense that something is missing that needs to be found. And so the journey continues, seeking, learning, healing, integrating, until something else begins to happen. The one who is seeking begins to be seen as well. You start to notice even the desire to find is becoming observed. Even the questions are becoming noticed. And this is where another shift occurs. You move from being the seeker to recognizing the observer, the one who is aware of it all. The thoughts, the emotions, the questions, even the seeking itself. And this awareness doesn't chase. It doesn't need to resolve. It simply sees. And this is where wholeness begins to be felt differently, because now nothing within you is outside of awareness. Nothing needs to be pushed away. Nothing needs to be held onto. Even the ego, the voice, the patterns, the identity you once carried is no longer something you are trying to get rid of. It becomes something you can see. And because it is seen, it no longer leads. This is the shift, not from having an ego to losing one, but from being led by it to no longer being defined by it. And as this stabilizes, the seeker naturally softens, not because seeking was wrong, but because it is no longer needed in the same way. The questions quiet, the urgency fades, and what remains is simple awareness, presence, being, not as something you practice, but as something you are. And this is why it feels like rest, because something in you is no longer trying to arrive, it already is. Wholeness doesn't remove you from life, it brings you fully into it. You still make decisions, still have conversations, still experience change. But there is a difference. You're no longer trying to become someone through those experiences. You're simply expressing what is already true. Wholeness looks like responding instead of reacting, speaking without needing to prove, loving without needing to hold. It's simple, but it's steady. There are also moments in scripture where this same kind of wholeness is reflected, not as perfection, not as escape, but as alignment. See, there's a man named Enoch. It says he walked with God, and then he was no more. Not because he disappeared into something distant, but because there was no longer separation between how he lived and what was true. There's also Elijah, who, instead of dying in the way people expected, was taken up in a whirlwind. And whether we read that literally or symbolically, what it points to is something deeper. A life so aligned that it is no longer experienced as divided. Even Moses, after everything he walked through, his passing is described in a way that leaves mystery. His body never found, not as something to chase, but as something to notice. That through these stories, Wholeness is not shown as achieving something, it is shown as a kind of union, a kind of closeness, a kind of being, where nothing is pulling away from what is true. And this is important because wholeness isn't about leaving life, it's about no longer being divided within it. And even in how I've come to understand it, there's a sense that this doesn't end, that when we transition, it's not separation, but continuation, not an ending, but a movement, like stepping into light or even fading into stillness, not as loss, but as a return to what was never divided. Worship is no longer reaching, it is resting, not something you do, but something you are, in how you breathe, in how you move, how you live. Truth is no longer something you seek. It is no longer even something you understand. It becomes something you are. And this is important. Wholeness does not replace the cycle. You will still experience awakening, healing, integration, but now they no longer pull you out of yourself. They move through you. Wholeness is not the end of the journey. It is the end of resistance to the journey.
So, as you move through your days, may you begin to notice where peace is already present, not as something you create, but as something you allow. May you recognize that you are not separate from what you've been seeking, that what you've longed for has been quietly living within you all along. May you rest, not because everything is finished, but because nothing is missing. And even as life continues to move, may you remain present, steady, whole. May your life become an expression, not of who you are trying to be, but of who you already are. And in that, may there be ease, not forced, not earned, but natural. And may you remember, you are not becoming, you are. Worship is union. Truth is not something you hold, it is something you live. And love is what remains when nothing is separate.